Samuel 30, starting at verse 1 through 6. But I'm going to just kind of lead you up to that and kind of do some commentary work here. You know, this is talking about David. David was anointed king at a very, very young age. He was a young teenager when he was called out of a shepherd's field, brought before his brothers and his father, and that Samuel anointed him to be king over all of Israel. Now that's quite a challenge. That is quite a task and quite a calling for such a young boy to have on his life. Now many of us can agree that that would be, kind of hard to comprehend and bring our minds and wrap our minds around something like that, to have that kind of responsibility at a very young age. But see, what happened to David after that Samuel poured the ephron of oil over his head? So the Spirit of God entered into David and was with him from that day forth, but he went back to being a shepherd. He went back to life as usual. And during that life of usual that he was living, he faced many, many struggles and trials and battles. And so that we see here that he, even before he faced Goliath, that he had already faced lions and bears protecting the sheep barehanded. It's not like they sent him out with a whole lot of weaponry. They just sent him out, and he knew that his job was to protect the sheep. And even at the cost of his own life, he put it. Him in between the lions and the bears, and slew them with his own hands as a young boy. Then we see him facing Goliath in his life, still as a mid-teenager. He even made reference to his battles out into the pastures with his sheep, of wrestling with the lions and bears to protect them. He said, hey, this ain't nothing. I've been through worse already. And then we see after that he is called into the king's courts and to Saul's courts. He became a mighty warrior for Saul, serving Saul in his army, fighting and defending Israel, being many times put out on a battlefield in harm's way. Battle after battle after battle, defending his land. As he was serving, now you got in mind, in his mind, he knew that he was anointed king. He grew up with that in his mind, that he was anointed king. But yet, he's out in the middle of a battlefield serving somebody else, a wicked king, being put in harm's way. And then they started to sing songs about David. They would sing songs about Saul, and they said, King Saul, he put 1,000 to flight. But David has put 10,000 to flight. And they were glorifying and they were praising David. And then the enemy come in and grew a root into Saul, and now Saul chased David with a vengeance. So we got David that is serving his nation, Israel, his people, by fighting for them and protecting them from the Philistines. And now we see that his own people, Saul and his army, turned against David and starts chasing David. Boy, you'd think that life's not pretty easy for a king, right? He's running for his own life. Not only is he facing an enemy, but his own people now is after him. And he's running from his own people. They come out of a battle. And David had learned how to hide amongst the enemy, amongst the Philistines. And he learned that they didn't communicate very well. So he went and befriended one of the kings of the Philistines. And they give him a place of refuge, the city of Ziklag. And as he went to this city, they would go out, they would fight, and then they would come back to the city of refuge. Now, David had 600 men that followed him around in his kind of battalion that was underneath his command. 600 men. That 600 men were highly elite trained soldiers. They would go up against tens of thousands, them 600 men. They were anointed, they were appointed by God, and they were protected by God. They were indestructible and undefeated when they would go out on the battlefield. These 600 men were also knew the plan and the call of David's life. These 600 men had sworn their allegiance to David to see him through to his destiny to the throne of Israel. These 600 men said, we know that what God has called you to be. We know your place and your end destiny in your life. And we swear allegiance to you through God that we will be by you to make sure that you make what God has called you to be. Now these men had been out in battle. And they come back to Ziklag. And as they are there in Ziklag, they do not enter the city. David says, wait a minute. Let's hold up here in the valley for just a little bit. Let's just stay here just for a little bit, and we'll just hang out here for a few minutes. Well, then it was a few days. And the reason that David was hanging out there was because he got wind and just kind of felt like the Philistines had maybe caught wind and that they may be there in Ziklag waiting for him. And they were tired. They were wore out. They were going back to Ziklag for refreshment so they could be with their families, so they could be and get refreshed and renourished and re-strengthened in their life. And he said, so let's just hang out right here in this valley, which was very unique, the spot that he chose to hang out. He was close enough to Ziklag that if Saul come, because Saul was terrified of the Philistines. Saul was petrified of them. Even when David was a young boy, we seen Saul, if we remember the story in Samuel 17, where David ran out to meet Goliath and Saul was trembling in his tent and give David his own armor. If you're willing to fight him, you go ahead. Saul was terrified of the Philistines. And so David knew that, and he said, okay, we're close enough to Ziklag that if Saul's army comes to attack me again, I can run into Ziklag and he'll never come around the Philistines. He's too petrified of them. But if the enemy has turned and we no longer have safe refuge in Ziklag, we can still flee and cut and run towards Israel until we can get our provisions and our strength. Thought he had a good plan, right? But he hung out there. And sometimes when God has a call and a purpose on our lives, he doesn't mean for us to hang out in limbo for too long. See, because that's what David was doing. He was hanging out in limbo. How many of us has ever hung out in limbo? Many years. And so here's where we pick back up. And let's stand for the reading of the word. We're going to be in 1 Samuel 30, starting at verse 1. And it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag and smitten the Ziklag and burned it with fire. And he had taken the women captive that therein, that they slew not any, neither great nor small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire. And with their lives and their sons and their daughters were taken captive. And David and his people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept. until they had no more power to weep. How many of us have been so broken that we had no more strength or power to cry? And David's 2 wives were taken captive, Ananoma, the Jezreelites, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite. And David was greatly depressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man his son and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Be reseated. You know, as I was speaking and started off, it was 15 years from the time that the oil and the anointing was applied on David's life before he became king of Judea. It was another 7 years before he fulfilled his calling on his life to become king of all of Israel. 22 years. At this point, David had been on the run more days than what that he had been alive from the time of his calling. And yet that we see here that when he come and they finally come out of the place of limbo and they walk into the city of Ziklag and they see that it is destroyed and that it was burned with fire and their wives and their children were taken, the men were so broken that they fell and wept so bitterly. I could see, because it is a Jewish tradition, that when they go into mourning that they cover themselves with ashes. And I could see this whole city that was burnt and was total ash. And that all these men that had served and had fought for Israel now was in the middle of this city covering themselves with the ashes of their loss, mourning and crying and screaming, "Why, God? Why this? We have fought so hard and been so faithful for so long, and yet we've lost everything in our life." And what I want to point out was the 600 men that knew the call on David's life were the first ones that was ready to kill him. Because of all that they had faced. I thought that was kind of unique. That these 600 men that swore their allegiance to make sure that they seen David to the throne was the first 600 in the middle of their grieving, in the middle of their loss, in the middle of the battle, was the first ones that turned against him. And I started thinking, oh dear Jesus. That sounds like the modern day church. Does it not? The church, we see the call, and we know the call in our lives. We see the call, and we see what God has purposed and has plans for others. But yet when things fall apart, it's like we all want to make stones and pick them up and take them out. We look and we judge. We've let people do these things and say these things to the point that we've snuffed off. And in the middle of the battle, take and rob us of our destiny and our call. And in doing so, we have also taken away our call and our destiny that God has planned for us. You know, and as more that I thought about this, and this being the church, you know, just because your brothers or sisters, just because your family members, just because your friends may have lost sight of the call and the destiny on your life, doesn't mean that God has lost sight of your call and destiny on your life. God still knows the plans that He has for you. God still knows the destiny that He has marked out in your life, even if no one else does in your life. And so that I see here in the very last verse, that is a very important word. And it is encouraged. Because when all of the world is turned against you, when your spouse is turned against you, when your children is turned against you, when your parents is turned against you, when your neighbors is turned against you, when your friends is turned against you, when your church is turned against you, right here's what you need to do, is this word encourage. This word encourage is hazak in the Hebrew. And I thought that it was very unique as I studied this out and I dug into it, because it is a very powerful word. The word there means to become strong, to grow in strength, to prevail when weak, and to grow firm. And so the more that I thought about that, the more that I started to see this, and then because it says it goes from being in one state to becoming another state. So what it is conveying and what that it is saying here, that when David was at his weakest, see, David was not strong at this point. He was weakened at this point. He just lost everything. His wives, his destiny, his future, his calling is all gone. And so he turned immediately to encourage. And so it conveys that when you were weak, then God made you strong. You were stammering, and then God put you into a position to prevail. It meant to be going in as the underdog. This word, how it was saying prevail, it meant to be called the underdog. And everybody would counted you out, but yet you walked out as a victor and a champion. You prevailed even when everything was against you. So I started to think about this and even studied this word, and it was saying here, as a seed being planted into the ground. When that seed first to break the crust, it is weak. You can very simply go out there and take your 2 fingers and smash that seedling and pluck it out. It's very weak and frail. But I'm going to tell you something. You give that seed long enough and it will grow into a huge, strong oak tree that can withstand any storm that is coming around. You'll no longer be able to pluck it out and pull it out of the ground so easily. And that's what this word encourage here conveys right here in the Hebrew. It was saying that David was weak, that David was vulnerable, that he was in distraught, that he was in stress in his life. But yet God encouraged him. God picked him up. God strengthened him. God put him as an underdog and made him an overcomer. Made him to prevail when he sought him out. Now, the very first thing that David done when God had renewed his strength was the very first thing was that he turned and he sought God for direction, which I thought was very unique. You know, because how many of us, we all automatically want to get in a fight. If the devil has come in or somebody has come in and messed with something, we want to get in a fight. Man, you let somebody come mess with our family, we're ready to just go head to toe, right? And this is David, and I thought this was powerful. Because after his family and all of his men's family were taken and their place of refuge was destroyed, David, after being strengthened and encouraged in the Lord, stood up and said, "Bring me the ephod. I want to pray." And he said, "God, if it be your will, give me direction. Do I chase after these men or do I let it go?" And I thought that was very powerful in our lives, that when we are in the middle of ashes, when we're in the middle of the morning, when everybody else has lost sight of our destiny, when we have lost sight of our destiny, and God encourages us, the very next thing that we need to do is go before God and say, "God, what is the direction that I take? Where do I go from here in my life? What is my next step?" We automatically want to get revenge. We automatically want to run and just take it head on. But see, David was wise enough that once God encouraged him, once God strengthened him, that it may not be God's will for him to run after them. It wasn't meaning that David had given up. David was just smart enough to know that God is in control. And that everything that he had lost, God was able to bring about and restore. See, they did not know if the women and the children were dead or alive. They didn't know why they took them or why they didn't take them. But yet, David sought direction from God and said, God, only you know what I should be doing. See, sometimes we need to get before God and say, God, only you know what I should be doing, God. I don't know. I have lost myself in the middle of the ashes. I have lost myself in the middle of this fight, and I'm confused. I'm hurt. I'm wore out, and I'm tired. But God, you strengthen me, and then give me direction on where to go and what to do. Don't let me get confused. Don't let me get in the middle of a fight that I should not be in. And see, the reason that I thought this was very unique, because at this very time, at this very moment that David was asking for direction from God to know to whether he should go get into a fight or not, to run after him or not, Saul was in a fight with the Philistines in a different area. That Saul just took it upon himself to go do. Saul took it upon himself to get into a fight that he was not called to be in. And yet David, in the middle of all the destruction, in the middle of all the ash, he comes up and he says, God, only you know if I should be fighting this or not. And God spoke to him and said, go. If you surely chase the enemy, you shall catch them and prevail and be restored everything that was lost. Now see, you got to remember that these 600 men, they had come in and they were laying in limbo because they were tired, right? And they were going back to Ziklag to be refreshed and be restored. Because they had what? Been in a battle already. So now they come back and they're there in Ziklag and they see everything that was lost. And then they went into such a deep mourning that they were physically drained. They were mentally and physically drained. But the same people that were looking to stone David and to kill him for what they had lost were the very ones that when David said, I have heard from God, let's gird up, let's run and let's chase the enemy down one more time and God will bring us back victory. One more time, let's do this one more time and God will see us through. They girded up and they took off and they chased the enemy. They come to a brook and a stream. And 200 of them said, we are just too weak that we can't even cross the brook here. How many of us has been in such a fight for so long in our lives? We've been in a battle for so long in our lives that we can't even get up the strength to cross the stream to go and fight. You know what David said? He said, then stay here and protect the stuff. Stay here and rest and protect the stuff. And so David took 400 men, crossed the stream, chased these guys down. And on the way, he come across an Egyptian from Ethiopia. And as he was there, this guy was sick, he was weak. And so David took, nourished him, gave him water, gave him bread, brought him back to strength. And then the guy, in doing so, spilled his guts on the enemy. He said, I was a slave and a servant to Amalek. And he said, and I know his plans and I know what he's got going on and where he's headed. And so David took that information and pursued him. Caught up with the enemy, and it said from dusk till twilight the next day that David's men slew and attacked Amalek. Now what I thought was unique was there was thousands of men there. Thousands of men, that 400 of David's soldiers that were tired and wore out fought for 24 hours straight beating back the enemy. It was the fight of their life. It was the biggest fight that they had ever been in. But not one of them lost their strength or their life. To a tune that the same number of men that David had escaped on camels. It said that 400 men of Amalek soldiers was able to get away and escape and get out on camels. This was a big fight. These 400 men they were doing it to them. And they were on their flight getting out. And so then David, after they prevailed, it said not only did they take back their wives and their children, but God restored them with not only the spoils that they lost from Ziklag, but they were restored back from all of the spoils that this army had been taking from everybody else. That's impressive. But see, here's the thing. It all started when David turned to be strengthened and get directions from God. This is where we have to train and discipline ourselves to get strength from God. Because in Philippians 2:12 and 13 it says, wherefore, my beloved, as that ye have always obeyed, not as in my absence or in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do for His good pleasure. Now I know I'm running out of time, but you stay with me and God's going to give you something today. That word work out is very critical here. Because that word work out is karakurs agizomai. And it means to perform, to accomplish, to achieve a result, or to bring about what is not. See, I've heard this scripture be quoted and be talked about, that God is challenging us to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. It's all right how I live. It's all right what I do. I'm working out my own salvation that God has given me with fear and trembling. Well, I'm going to just tell you something, and I'm not going to stay on here too long, or I'll be like David and you'll be looking for stones to throw at me. But anyway, I'm going to just point out like this. God is not telling you to work out your physical salvation. God has already, through the blood of Jesus Christ, given you that salvation. And it's not telling you what you can do that is right or wrong, because God has already told you what you can do that is right or wrong. If you don't believe me, then we can spend all day and we can go through the scriptures, and it tells us that we shall not lie, that we should not cheat, that we should not steal, that we should not commit adultery, that we should not fornicate. He tells us to know better and to do it anyway. It's sin. So if we know to do something and we don't do it, that is sin. He has already told us that is not working out our salvation and making excuses for our behavior. God has called us to a place of obedience. Because He said, as that you have always obeyed. Obeyed what? The Word. Now see, something that we get and we lose a revelation of when Paul or when any of the disciples were writing scriptures. And see, a lot of us believe that the Old Testament is kind of outdated, kind of antiquated, and not really important, and we spend all of our time in the New Testament. But I'm going to tell you, let's get a perspective of the disciples. Let's get a perspective of Paul. Let's get a perspective of Peter and of John. What did they do? When they were writing their writings, they were reflecting the Word of God that was in the Old Testament. So when he was talking about obeying, he was talking about the directions that they had been given through salvation, through Jesus Christ and the obedience, but he was pointing back of being disciplined in their life. Wasn't talking about salvation. It was talking about the preservation. Working out our preservation to begin, because salvation also means to be preserved. Preservation. And he said, so working out your preservation, working out. And see, here's where we lose this sometimes. Because some of us, we think that we should be able to just show up every once in a while, that we should be able to just kind of just get in every once in a while, and God work everything out for them, and everything fall into place, and everything just be hunky-dory in your life. Boy, this is going over real well. But see, that word work out means to bring to pass. When the enemy is attacking your life, when the enemy is coming at you at a full onslaught, and everything is going wrong, and there's ashes all around you, you got to get up, you got to encourage yourself, and you got to work it out. You got to bring to pass what God has put in your life. What would have happened if David would have laid in the ashes and not worked out what God had put before him? Sometimes working out means that we got to fight in the middle of all the trouble, all the turmoil. We got to bring to pass what God has spoken over our life. When everybody else has lost sight of our calling and what God has spoken into our life, we got to work it out. We got to do some work and keep a fighting. I know that this was what David had, or that Paul had in mind. As Paul was sitting here and was writing to the Philippians, and he was telling them, because see, nobody knows what your call is going to cost you. None of us know when God calls us into a place of salvation, God calls us into a place of fellowship with Him. None of us know what His destiny that He has for us, what it's going to cost us. Because the enemy is after that call. And the devil will not stop at your life, at your family, at your finances, at your business, whatever that you're in. The devil will not stop. He will be relentless at your life to take you out. So we don't know what it's going to cost. But the thing is, that whatever is in front of us, Jesus Christ has assured us if we stay in the fight, that He will bring us through every single time in our life. Yes, He will. Paul was telling them, just right before that, he said, I had no idea what it would cost me to bring you the gospel. Right there in Philippians, just right before that. Imprisonment. Even being a martyr. And he said, and I'm glad to do it. See, he didn't know there was people that was with Paul that had come deathly sick, physically sick. They didn't know that their physical bodies would be torn down and attacked. Timothy did not know the amount of work and the amount of stress and the amount of service was going to be placed on his life and what he would have to overcome to fulfill that. So often we do not understand what it's going to cost us to be in this fight. But I'm going to tell you, if we're working it out, God will work up some strength. He'll work up some encouragement in you that you'll be able to march on no matter what you face in your life. See, and this is where so often that we think because that things are going wrong that we lose sight of the victory. I've heard so many people say, I have had to miss it somewhere. Something's going wrong. I don't know why I'm going through all this. I don't know why I'm facing all this trouble. I don't know how much longer that I have to do this. I don't know how many more times I have to go through this. And see, we let the enemy come in and rob us of our plan and our destiny that God has got for us. But I want to tell you, when we start working out, when we start bringing to pass the things that God has got in. See, David and his 400 men did not have the strength to overcome that army, but God strengthened them and gave them the ability to do the impossible. When you're at your weakest and you think that you have fought as long as that you can fight in your life, when you think that you'll never be delivered, when you think that you'll never have a breakthrough, when you think your family member will never come in, when you think that you're at your wits' end and it ain't going to get no better, God will bring the impossible to possibility in your life by you working it out. 1 Timothy, and I'm putting an anchor on it. 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, let no man despise thy youth. This is Paul talking to Timothy. But be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. To be an example. When? See, I already told you that Timothy was under so much stress. The Ephesian church, the church of Ephesus, was growing so fast and it was being so overwhelming. There was hundreds of churches popping up all over Ephesus. And Timothy was chosen to be the bishop, the leader, the matriarch over all of them churches. And there was so much because he was right slap dab in the middle of pagan territory. The worst of the worst. Timothy was in that. He was being attacked personally, physically, mentally. He was fighting back the forces of darkness. And so what does Paul tell him to do? Work out! Work out the attack in your life. Be an example for everybody else to see what being a servant of Jesus Christ is all about in your life. When it comes to believing and being alive and living your life for believers, you do it in word. You sharpen your sword and you live your life with a sharp sword for everyone around you. You live your life in conversation. You watch what you say. You watch how you say it. And you watch how it is with your words. In charity, you learn how to love. You learn how to give against everything else. When somebody says something wrong about you, when somebody is coming against you, you love them just like Jesus Christ loved you. In spirit. You stir up the spirit inside of you. We see that Paul tells him, Timothy, oh Timothy, stir up the spirit inside of you. And right there, that word stir up right there, it gives a picture in the Greek of somebody having coals and ashes there and fanning it and working it, giving it oxygen to bring that fire back to life. It is work. It is work to stir up the spirit that is inside of us. It is work to fan the flames of the coals that the enemy has left us in. But when we start the spirit stirred up, when we start to flame it, and we start to get that spirit moving inside of us again, we now can do the impossible in our life. That word example there is tupos, a mark of a stroke or a blow. It's to leave a mark when you hit something, or when you wall off to knock something out, you leave a mark there. Or it means to leave a mark or an impression upon someone. Oh, Jesus, help us. Because when we are living our lives and we are working out the call of God in our lives, when we are fighting to stay on track and we're fighting to keep on our destiny, I'm going to guarantee you it's going to make a mark on other people that are around you. When everybody else has counted you out, when everybody else said that you should have given up, when everybody else said that you should have just quit a long time ago, and nobody else believes that you can make it, and you keep on working it out, you keep on living that life, it will make a mark. It will make an impression on everybody else around you. It will make an impression. Because, see, here's the thing. That word right there, example, that tupos, we find another example of this word, of just how great of an impression or a mark that it means to be stricken by or to be felt. We find it in John 20 and 25 where it says that Thomas was standing there amongst all the disciples. It said, I will not believe that it is Jesus until I can put my hand in the print of his hand. Or I can put my hand in the print of his foot. That word print there is tupos. So that's the kind of mark. He's saying, I will not believe it is Jesus until I can feel the mark and the impression that was left on him. Oh, Thomas. When he felt the impression, the marks that was left on Jesus, It left an impression and a mark on him. It changed him for life. Now here's where I'm going to wrap this up. I know that I've ran over, but here's the thing that I want you to look at, that God just so encouraged in my heart. As I was studying this out and reading this, when David and all of his 400 men met back up with the other 200, and they went back to Ziklag, and they walked into the city of Ziklag, and they were there to be refreshed. Before they could get all of their troops there, before they could get everything done in the middle of the ashes, 2 days after that victory, David was anointed king of Judea. 15 years of fighting and struggling, God's call first come to pass. 2 days. 2 days after all of this. What would have happened if David would have been in the middle of them ashes and would have laid there and give up after losing everything? He'd have missed his promise by 2 days. Oh, Jesus. Let's think about that. He would have missed his promise by 2 days. He'd have missed what God had spoken in his life. All of that 15 years of struggling and fighting and running and toiling, he'd have missed it by 2 days. This is a word for somebody. Somebody's wanting to give up. Somebody's wanting to quit the fight. And I'm here to tell you today, you could be 2 days away from what God has promised you. You could be 2 days from that family member coming in. You could be 2 days from that deliverance. You could be 2 days from that healing. You could be 2 days from that financial breakthrough. You could be 2 days from what God has spoken to your life. You say, how long? I'm going to tell you how much more. It may be 2 days. You may be 2 days away from receiving everything that God has promised to you in your life. And to think the enemy burned out David, took everything that he had, and he knew that he was getting close to fulfilling his destiny, and he was hitting him with everything that he had. I'm going to tell you, when you get close to your destiny, when you get close to seeing what God has for you, when you get close to that promise, so does the enemy. He sees it in your life, and he's going to do all that he can to work, to take, to steal, to kill, and destroy everything in your life. You could be 2 days. David had to make a decision in his life. He had to make a decision. Am I going to give up today and lose sight of everything that God has promised me? Or am I going to encourage myself in the Lord and keep a fighting? He had no idea. No idea that it was just 2 days away. That's the miracle. He had no idea, but he made it up in his mind that he was going to fight no matter what until God purposed his plan in his life. He was going to keep it going through the battle. No matter what else he had to face, he was going to keep it charging on. 2 days. So I ask you this morning, the enemy may have you in a pile of ashes. The enemy may have destroyed and burnt everything in your life to where everything looks wrecked and ruined. So what are you going to do?